Hello there, and welcome back to Bedtime Science. I'm really glad you're here tonight. The ocean covers 71% of Earth's surface, holds 97% of all water on the planet, and remains, in large part, insufficiently mapped and directly unexplored. Some regions of Mars are mapped more consistently than many parts of Earth's own seafloor. The ocean is the oldest habitat on Earth, the largest, and by almost every measure, the least understood. What lives in its deepest trenches? What moves through its coldest and darkest layers? And what processes drive its behavior across centuries? The salinity of the ocean is remarkably stable over geological time, maintained by a balance between the input of dissolved minerals from rivers and rainfall and the removal of those minerals through geological processes, including the formation of sedimentary rock and the cycling of ocean water through hydrothermal vents in the seafloor. The salinity of the ocean 500 million years ago was probably not dramatically different from what it is today. Life in the ocean has been operating in a chemically stable environment for hundreds of millions of years, a stability that has been important for the evolution and persistence of marine biology. Ocean water is stratified into layers with different temperatures, densities, and salinities that do not readily mix with each other. The uppermost layer, called the epipelagic zone or sunlit zone, extends from the surface to approximately 200 meters depth. This is where almost all photosynthesis occurs, where most ocean life is concentrated, and where the interaction between ocean and atmosphere drives most of the ocean's role in weather and climate. Below 200 meters, light diminishes rapidly. By 1,000 meters, there is effectively no sunlight at all. The mesopelagic zone, from 200 to 1,000 meters, is a twilight world of extremely dim light where vision becomes unreliable and many animals have evolved bioluminescence, the ability to produce their own light, as their primary means of communication, predation, and camouflage. Bioluminescence is one of the most widespread biological phenomena in the ocean. It is estimated that 76% of all deep-sea organisms produce light. This is not a minor biological curiosity. It is one of the dominant modes of communication and interaction in the ocean's largest habitat, the deep mesopelagic and bathypelagic zones. The mechanisms differ between species. Some bioluminescence is produced directly through enzyme-driven chemical reactions involving luciferin and luciferase. Some is produced by symbiotic bacteria hosted within specialized organs. Some is produced through entirely different chemical pathways. The colors differ. Blue is most common in open ocean bioluminescence because blue light travels furthest through seawater, but red, green, yellow, and even infrared bioluminescence has been documented in different organisms. On a moonless night at sea, the ocean surface can glow blue where bioluminescent plankton have been disturbed by waves or the wake of a boat. One of the most otherworldly natural sights a person can witness on this planet. The deep ocean is divided by oceanographers into several zones based on depth and the conditions that prevail there. The bathypelagic zone, from 1,000 to 4,000 meters, is a world of total darkness, near freezing temperatures, and pressures extreme enough to crush unprotected human tissue. The abyssal zone, from 4,000 to 6,000 meters, covers more of Earth's surface than any other habitat, approximately 54%. The hadal zone, below 6,000 meters, exists only in the ocean trenches, narrow channels plunging through the ocean floor where tectonic plates have subducted. Despite conditions that would be instantly lethal to most surface-dwelling life, all of these zones are inhabited. The deep ocean is not empty. It is cold, dark, slow, and full of life adapted to conditions that have no parallel at the surface. The thermohaline circulation, sometimes called the global ocean conveyor belt, is a system of ocean currents driven by differences in water temperature and salinity. Cold, Salty water in the North Atlantic sinks to the deep ocean because it is denser than the surrounding water, and this sinking drives a circulation pattern that carries deep cold water southward through the Atlantic, around Antarctica, and eventually northward into the Pacific and Indian Oceans, where it gradually warms and rises to the surface. The surface return flow brings warm tropical water northward through the Atlantic, and this warm surface current, the North Atlantic Current, of which the Gulf Stream is a part, releases heat into the atmosphere over northern Europe, warming the climate of Western Europe by an estimated 5 to 10 degrees Celsius relative to what it would be without the current. The thermohaline circulation is not a fast system. A water molecule completing a full circuit of the global ocean conveyor takes approximately 1,000 years. The Gulf Stream is one of the most powerful ocean currents on Earth, transporting approximately 30 million cubic meters of water per second at its narrowest point, roughly 150 times the combined flow of all the world's rivers. It flows northward along the eastern coast of North America before crossing the North Atlantic, and its warmth is responsible for making Western European climates significantly milder than they would otherwise be at those latitudes. London sits at roughly the same latitude as Calgary, Canada, but experiences winters far less severe because of the ocean's warmth. The stability of the Gulf Stream and the broader Atlantic meridional overturning circulation is one of the most closely monitored aspects of ocean physics, because evidence suggests it has slowed in recent decades, raising concerns about potential tipping point behavior. Ocean waves are generated primarily by wind transferring energy to the water surface. The size of a wave depends on wind speed, the duration of the wind, and the fetch, the unobstructed distance of water over which the wind blows. The Southern Ocean, which encircles Antarctica with no land barrier interrupting the fetch, generates the largest average wave heights on Earth. Rogue waves, waves significantly larger than the surrounding sea state, historically dismissed as sailor mythology, were confirmed by scientific measurements in 1995 when the Dropner wave, a 25.6-meter wave measured on a Norwegian oil platform, was recorded. Satellite altimetry data has since confirmed that rogue waves are far more common than statistical models of ordinary wave behavior predicted, suggesting that nonlinear wave interactions can concentrate energy in ways that standard models underestimated. The deepest ocean trench that has been directly explored is the Mariana Trench, and the number of people who have descended to its deepest point is smaller than the number who have walked on the moon. The first crewed descent to the Challenger Deep was made by Jacques Picard and Don Walsh in January 1960 in the Bathyscaphe Trieste. They spent approximately 20 minutes on the bottom before ascending, and during that time they observed a flatfish-like creature, probably a snailfish, moving across the sediment, confirming that vertebrate life existed even at the greatest ocean depths. Subsequent unmanned expeditions have collected organisms and sediment from the deepest parts of the trench, revealing a biologically active community adapted to conditions of extreme pressure, cold, and chemical isolation. Hydrothermal vents were discovered in 1977 when oceanographers diving in the submersible Alvin near the Galapagos Rift found structures on the ocean floor that looked like chimneys, billowing water heated to several hundred degrees Celsius. The water erupting from these vents is superheated by proximity to the magma beneath the ocean crust and is saturated with dissolved minerals, including sulfides of iron, copper, and zinc. When this superheated, mineral-rich water contacts the cold surrounding ocean water, the minerals precipitate out, building the chimney structures. What was even more astonishing than the vents themselves was what lived around them. Dense communities of organisms completely independent of sunlight for their energy. The primary producers in these communities are chemosynthetic bacteria that extract energy from the chemical reactions between hydrogen sulfide and oxygen, forming the base of a food web entirely unlike anything at the surface. The discovery of hydrothermal vent ecosystems fundamentally changed thinking about the requirements for life and about the possible distribution of life elsewhere in the solar system, particularly in the subsurface oceans of moons like Europa and Enceladus. Cold seeps are features of the ocean floor superficially similar to hydrothermal vents, but operating through entirely different chemistry. Rather than superheated water, cold seeps emit methane and hydrogen sulfide from sediments at ambient bottom temperatures. The communities that form around cold seeps include tube worms, mussels, clams, and a variety of microorganisms, all supported by chemosynthesis. Cold seep communities are extraordinarily long-lived. The tube worms that populate them can live for hundreds of years, making them among the longest-lived animals on Earth. Some cold seep communities appear to persist for thousands of years, outlasting the individual organisms that compose them as succeeding generations establish themselves in the same location. The ocean floor is not a uniform flat plane. It is geologically active and topographically complex, containing the world's longest mountain range, the Mid-Ocean Ridge System, which extends for approximately 65,000 kilometers through all the world's ocean basins. The mid-ocean ridges are the site of seafloor spreading, the process by which new oceanic crust is formed as magma wells up from the mantle and solidifies. The spreading is slow. The rate at which the mid-Atlantic ridge spreads, for example, is approximately 2.5 centimeters per year, roughly the rate at which fingernails grow. But multiplied over millions of years, this process has reshaped the ocean basins entirely. The Atlantic Ocean did not exist 200 million years ago. It formed and continues to widen through the ongoing process of seafloor spreading at the mid-Atlantic ridge. Ocean tides are produced primarily by the gravitational pull of the moon, with a smaller contribution from the sun. The moon's gravity pulls ocean water toward the side of the Earth facing the moon, creating a tidal bulge. A corresponding bulge forms on the opposite side of the Earth through inertial effects. As the Earth rotates beneath these bulges, most coastal locations experience 2 high tides and 2 low tides per day, though the details of the tidal cycle at any particular location depend on the local geometry of the coastline and ocean basin. The largest tidal ranges on Earth occur in the Bay of Fundy in Nova Scotia, where the tidal range reaches up to 16 meters. The geometry of the bay creates a resonance effect that amplifies the tides dramatically. The Bay of Fundy's tidal cycle moves more water in and out during each tide than the total flow of all the freshwater rivers on Earth combined. Tsunamis are often mischaracterized as giant waves, but they are more accurately described as a series of very long ocean waves generated by the sudden displacement of large volumes of water, typically by submarine earthquakes, but also by volcanic eruptions, submarine landslides, or in rare cases meteorite impacts. In the open ocean, a tsunami wave may be only 1 to 3 meters tall but hundreds of kilometers long, and it travels at speeds up to 800 kilometers per hour, roughly the cruising speed of a jet aircraft. As the wave approaches shore and the ocean floor shallows, its speed decreases and its height increases dramatically, concentrating the enormous energy of the wave into a much smaller vertical space. The 2004 Indian Ocean tsunami, generated by one of the largest earthquakes ever recorded, displaced approximately 30 cubic kilometers of water and killed over 230,000 people across 14 countries, the deadliest natural disaster in recorded history. The ocean's role in Earth's climate system extends far beyond the Gulf Stream and thermohaline circulation. The ocean absorbs approximately 30% of the carbon dioxide emitted by human activities each year, and it has absorbed roughly 90% of the excess heat generated by the greenhouse effect since industrialization. This buffering function has significantly moderated the rate of atmospheric warming. Without the ocean's heat and carbon absorption, the atmosphere would have warmed considerably faster than it has. The cost of this buffering is ocean acidification. As CO2 dissolves in seawater, it forms carbonic acid, reducing the ocean's pH. The ocean is now approximately 0.1 pH units more acidic than it was before the Industrial Revolution, a modest-sounding number that represents a 26% increase in acidity due to the logarithmic nature of the pH scale. This acidification has measurable effects on organisms that build calcium carbonate shells and skeletons, including coral, oysters, sea urchins, and many species of plankton. Coral reefs cover less than 0.1% of the ocean floor, but support approximately 25% of all known marine species. They are the most biologically diverse marine ecosystems on Earth, comparable to tropical rainforests in the density and variety of life they support. The architects of the reef, coral polyps, are tiny animals that secrete calcium carbonate skeletons and live in symbiosis with photosynthetic algae called zooxanthellae, which live in the coral tissue and provide the coral with up to 90% of its energy through photosynthesis. The brilliant colors of healthy coral come largely from these symbiotic algae. When water temperatures rise beyond the coral's tolerance, even by as little as 1 to 2 degrees Celsius above the seasonal maximum, the coral expels its zooxanthellae in a stress response, turning white in a process called coral bleaching. Without the algae, the coral is alive but effectively starving. If temperatures return to normal quickly, the algae can be reacquired and the coral recovers. If the thermal stress is prolonged, the coral dies. The Great Barrier Reef, off the northeastern coast of Australia, is the largest biological structure on Earth, extending for approximately 2,300 kilometers and covering roughly 344,400 square kilometers. It is large enough to be visible from space. It is composed of approximately 2,900 individual reef systems and coral cays, and supports an extraordinary biodiversity, including more than 1,500 species of fish, 4,000 species of mollusk, 240 species of birds, and 6 of the world's 7 species of sea turtle. The reef is ancient. The current reef structure is approximately 6,000 to 8,000 years old, built on the foundations of older reef systems going back 500,000 years. Repeated mass bleaching events driven by elevated sea temperatures have affected the Great Barrier Reef again and again in recent years, including major events confirmed in 2024 and 2025. These events have caused substantial declines in coral cover in multiple regions of the reef system. Phytoplankton, microscopic photosynthetic organisms, including algae and cyanobacteria, are the foundation of almost all marine food webs and are responsible for approximately half of all photosynthesis on Earth. Every second breath you take was made possible by phytoplankton. The total mass of phytoplankton in the ocean is relatively small, far less than the biomass of terrestrial plants, but their rate of primary production is extraordinarily high due to their rapid reproduction and turnover. Phytoplankton populations can double in size within hours under optimal conditions. The distribution of phytoplankton in the ocean is not uniform. They are concentrated in the sunlit surface waters and are most abundant in regions where nutrients are upwelled from the deep ocean. The seasonal blooms of phytoplankton in temperate and polar waters are some of the most dramatic biological events on the planet, transforming the color of the sea surface from blue to green over thousands of square kilometers in a matter of weeks. Zooplankton, the animal component of the plankton, includes an extraordinary variety of organisms, from single-celled protozoa to the larvae of fish, crabs, and sea urchins, to small crustaceans called copepods. Copepods are arguably the most abundant multicellular animals on Earth, present in almost every part of the ocean in numbers that are almost impossible to express meaningfully. A liter of ocean water from the surface of a productive ocean region may contain hundreds of copepods. Multiplied across the entire volume of productive ocean water, the global copepod population is almost certainly in the quadrillions. Copepods are a critical link in ocean food webs, feeding on phytoplankton and bacteria and being eaten in turn by small fish, which are eaten by larger fish, which are eaten by marine mammals, seabirds, and humans. The entire edifice of ocean fisheries, marine mammal populations, and seabird colonies rests, ultimately, on these tiny animals. The vertical migration of zooplankton and small fish is one of the most significant biological movements on the planet. Every day, billions of organisms in the mesopelagic zone migrate upward toward the surface at dusk to feed on the phytoplankton-rich surface waters and descend again to depth at dawn to escape visual predators. This daily vertical migration is the largest regular migration of biomass on Earth, and it plays an important role in the ocean carbon cycle. Organisms eat carbon-rich food at the surface, carry it into the deep as they descend, respire it at depth, and eventually die and sink. This biological pump transfers enormous quantities of carbon from the surface waters to the deep ocean every day, and is a significant mechanism by which the ocean sequesters carbon from the atmosphere. The whale shark is the largest fish on Earth, reaching lengths of up to 12 to 14 meters and weights of up to 21.5 tons. Despite this extraordinary size, it feeds on some of the smallest organisms in the ocean, primarily plankton, small fish, and fish eggs, filtering enormous volumes of water through its gaping mouth as it swims slowly near the surface. Whale sharks are found in tropical and warm temperate seas worldwide and are highly migratory, traveling thousands of kilometers between feeding grounds. Their movements, tracked through satellite tagging, reveal that they navigate the open ocean with a directionality that suggests they are following environmental cues, temperature gradients, chlorophyll concentrations, or possibly geomagnetic signals, over very large distances. Despite their size and iconic status, basic aspects of whale shark biology, including their reproductive behavior, the location of their nursery grounds, and the details of their global migration routes, remain poorly understood. Blue whales are the largest animals that have ever existed on Earth. The largest individuals recorded reach lengths of approximately 33 meters and weights of approximately 180 tons, exceeding the mass of the largest dinosaurs. Their hearts weigh approximately 180 kilograms, roughly the size of a small car. Their calls, which travel through the ocean at the speed of sound in water, are among the loudest biological sounds on Earth, reaching frequencies around 10 to 40 hertz and amplitudes of up to 188 decibels. Because these calls are in the infrasonic range, below the threshold of human hearing, they were not detected and recorded until the development of underwater acoustic monitoring equipment. Blue whales can communicate across hundreds of kilometers of open ocean through these calls. Despite their size, they feed almost exclusively on krill, tiny crustaceans typically only a few centimeters long, and can consume up to 4 tons of krill per day during feeding season. The sperm whale has the largest brain of any animal that has ever lived, with a brain mass of approximately 8 kilograms, roughly 5 times that of a human brain. Sperm whales are the deepest diving mammals, capable of descending to depths of over 2,000 meters and remaining submerged for up to 90 minutes. They navigate and hunt using echolocation clicks of extraordinary power. Their sonar clicks are among the loudest sounds produced by any biological source, reaching intensities of up to 230 decibels, loud enough in principle to stun or kill prey. Their primary prey is the giant squid, which lives in the mesopelagic and bathypelagic zones. Sperm whale skin frequently bears circular scars from the suckers of giant squid, evidence of encounters with prey in total darkness at crushing pressures thousands of meters below the surface. The social structure of sperm whales is complex and matrilineal. Females and their young live in permanent social groups, while adult males roam the ocean solitarily, returning to female groups only for mating. Sperm whale groups have distinct dialects, patterns of clicks called codas that are group-specific and culturally transmitted from older individuals to younger ones, representing one of the clearest examples of cultural transmission in non-human animals. The giant squid, Architeuthis dux, remains one of the most poorly studied of all large animals. For most of recorded history, giant squids were known only from carcasses washed ashore or found in the stomachs of sperm whales. The first photographs of a live giant squid in its natural habitat were not obtained until 2004, and the first video footage was not recorded until 2012. The giant squid can reach lengths of up to 13 meters including tentacles, and has eyes that can be up to 30 centimeters in diameter, the largest eyes of any living animal. Large eyes in deep-sea animals are thought to serve the detection of bioluminescent signals in near-total darkness, and possibly the detection of the silhouettes of large predators, such as sperm whales, against the faint surface light from far above. The colossal squid, Mesonicoteuthis hamiltoni, is even larger than the giant squid and is the largest invertebrate on Earth by mass, though not by length. While giant squid reach greater lengths, colossal squid are bulkier, with masses estimated to exceed 500 kilograms in the largest individuals. Colossal squids live in the deep waters of the Southern Ocean and are even less studied than giant squid. Most knowledge of them comes from mantle fragments recovered from sperm whale stomachs. They possess rotating hooks on their tentacles rather than simple suckers, a feature thought to assist in holding struggling prey. The total reproductive output, population size, and precise depth distribution of colossal squid are essentially unknown. It is one of the largest animals on Earth, and we have never seen a healthy adult alive. The mimic octopus, discovered in 1998 in the waters of Indonesia, is capable of impersonating a variety of other marine animals, including flatfish, lionfish, and sea snakes, apparently switching between mimicry targets depending on which local predator is threatening it at the time. It alters not only its coloration and pattern, but its body shape and movement, flattening itself and undulating its arms to mimic a flounder, or extending two arms to mimic the body of a sea snake and pulling the others into its burrow. The cognitive flexibility required to assess a threat, select an appropriate impersonation, and execute the mimicry with sufficient accuracy to deceive other animals suggests a degree of behavioral sophistication in octopuses that continues to generate significant scientific interest. Dolphins are among the most cognitively sophisticated of all non-human animals. Bottlenose dolphins pass the mirror self-recognition test, the same test that great apes, elephants, and very few other species can pass, demonstrating a degree of self-awareness that is remarkable in a brain with a very different architecture from that of primates. Dolphins use tools. Populations in Shark Bay, Australia, use sponges held on their beaks to probe sandy seafloor for hidden fish, protecting themselves from abrasion. This tool use behavior is learned socially, transmitted from mothers to daughters, and is maintained as a cultural tradition within the population. Dolphins also engage in complex cooperative behaviors, coordinated play, and apparently purposeless activities that have been described as something resembling play for its own sake. Their communication is sophisticated, involving individually distinctive whistles, signature whistles, that function somewhat like names, and that dolphins use to address each other specifically. Sea otters are a keystone species in the kelp forest ecosystems of the North Pacific. and their ecological role illustrates how profoundly the removal or addition of a single species can alter an entire ecosystem. Sea otters feed heavily on sea urchins, which in turn feed on kelp. When sea otter populations are healthy, urchin populations are kept in check and kelp forests thrive. Complex, three-dimensional ecosystems that support hundreds of species of fish, marine mammals, and invertebrates. When sea otters are absent, urchin populations explode and devour the kelp, leaving barren, urchin-dominated seafloor called urchin barrens, which support a small fraction of the biodiversity of healthy kelp forest. The near extinction of sea otters through the 18th and 19th century fur trade caused the collapse of kelp forest ecosystems across large areas of the North Pacific. The recovery of sea otter populations in areas where they have been protected has been followed by recovery of kelp forest ecosystems, demonstrating the trophic cascade, the series of ecological changes that flow through a food web from the top down when a top predator is removed or restored. Seahorses are among the most unusual of all fish in multiple respects. They swim vertically using a dorsal fin that oscillates up to 70 times per second, and they steer with small pectoral fins. They are the only vertebrates in which the male becomes pregnant. The female deposits eggs into a pouch on the male's trunk, and the male fertilizes them internally, carries them through gestation, and gives birth to live young. The gestation period varies by species, but is typically 2 to 4 weeks. A single male seahorse can give birth to up to 2,000 young in a single birthing event. Seahorses are monogamous within a breeding season in most species, and pairs engage in daily greeting rituals, intertwining their tails and briefly changing color together. They are also extremely poor swimmers and highly vulnerable to strong currents, and their survival strategy depends heavily on camouflage and stillness rather than escape. The mantis shrimp is a crustacean whose visual and striking abilities have both attracted serious scientific study. Its eyes contain up to 16 types of photoreceptors, compared to 3 in humans, including receptors sensitive to ultraviolet and infrared light and to polarized light in multiple orientations. Despite this extraordinary visual equipment, research has found that mantis shrimps are actually rather poor at discriminating between similar colors. Their visual system appears to use a different strategy from human color vision, based on receptor-level detection of specific wavelengths rather than comparison across receptors. The mantis shrimp strike is one of the fastest movements in the animal kingdom. The dactyl clubs, the club-like appendages used to smash prey, accelerate at up to 10,000 times the acceleration due to gravity, reaching speeds of about 80 kilometers per hour and generating forces sufficient to break aquarium glass. The strike is so fast and so forceful that it creates cavitation bubbles, regions of near vacuum in the water, whose collapse generates an additional pressure wave, effectively hitting the prey twice. Deep-sea fish have evolved an extraordinary range of adaptations to a world of total darkness, crushing pressure, near-freezing temperatures, and extremely limited food. The anglerfish is perhaps the most iconic of these adaptations. The female carries a bioluminescent lure on an extension of her spine, dangling it in front of her jaws to attract prey. The bioluminescence of the lure is produced by symbiotic bacteria housed in the bulb at the tip of the appendage. In some anglerfish species, the male is tiny, and when he encounters a female, he bites into her body and fuses with her permanently, their circulatory systems merging so that he receives nutrients from her bloodstream and provides sperm in return. The male loses his eyes, his fins, and most of his internal organs, becoming in effect a reproductive appendage permanently attached to the female. Multiple males can be found fused to a single female in some specimens. The ocean is not silent. For a long time, the phrase "silent as the sea" captured a widespread human assumption, but underwater acoustics research has revealed that the ocean is an extraordinarily noisy place. It is filled with the calls of cetaceans, some spanning thousands of kilometers, the crackling and clicking of snapping shrimp forming what is called the snapping shrimp chorus, the grinding of rocks and sediment moving in currents, the drumming of fish that use their swim bladders to produce sound for territorial defense and courtship, the roar of submarine volcanoes, the sound of rain on the surface heard from below, and the deep, low rumble of distant earthquakes. Shipping noise, sonar, and industrial activity have significantly altered the acoustic environment of the ocean over the past century, with documented effects on marine mammals that rely on sound for navigation, communication, and foraging. The ocean is a sonic landscape as rich and as complex as any above the surface. The ocean's surface temperature is not uniform. It varies from above 30 degrees Celsius in the warmest tropical waters to minus 1.8 degrees Celsius in the polar seas. Seawater freezes at a slightly lower temperature than freshwater because of its dissolved salt. Ocean temperatures are not static. They fluctuate seasonally and on longer timescales through climate phenomena, including El Niño and La Niña, which involve anomalous warming and cooling of the central and eastern tropical Pacific Ocean on timescales of 2 to 7 years. El Niño events redistribute heat and moisture globally, causing droughts in some regions, floods in others, changes in hurricane activity, and disruptions to fisheries. The 1997 to 1998 El Niño event caused an estimated $16 billion of damage globally and contributed to widespread coral bleaching across the Indo-Pacific. Sea ice covers approximately 25 million square kilometers of ocean at its maximum winter extent, roughly 2.5 times the area of the United States. Arctic sea ice and Antarctic sea ice are fundamentally different in their structure and behavior. Arctic sea ice forms over the enclosed Arctic Ocean, and some of it persists year-round, building into multi-year ice that can be several meters thick and can persist for decades. Antarctic sea ice forms over the open Southern Ocean, and almost all of it melts each summer. It is a seasonal phenomenon driven by temperature rather than by the enclosed geography that preserves Arctic ice year-round. The loss of Arctic sea ice in recent decades has been one of the most dramatic and closely monitored changes in the Earth system. Minimum sea ice extent in September has declined by approximately 13% per decade since satellite observations began in 1979, and the rate of loss has accelerated. The formation of sea ice is itself a process with significant implications for ocean circulation. When seawater freezes, salt is largely expelled from the ice crystal structure and concentrated in the water beneath, increasing its density. This dense, cold, salty water sinks and contributes to the formation of Antarctic bottom water and North Atlantic deep water, the deep water masses that drive the thermohaline circulation. Changes in the rate of sea ice formation in the polar regions can therefore influence the global ocean circulation, with potential consequences for climate patterns far from the poles. Ocean currents carry not only heat and water but also organisms, sediment, and debris across ocean basins. The North Pacific Gyre, one of 5 major oceanic gyres, large rotating systems of ocean currents, has accumulated floating debris in its center through the convergence of surface currents, forming the region sometimes called the Great Pacific Garbage Patch. The garbage patch is not the solid island of plastic that popular accounts sometimes describe. It is a diffuse region of elevated plastic particle concentration, much of it consisting of microplastics, broken down fragments of plastic products too small to see easily with the naked eye. Microplastics have been found in the gut contents of organisms throughout the marine food web, from surface zooplankton to deep-sea fish to baleen whales. They have also been found in Arctic sea ice, in deep-sea sediments in the Mariana Trench, and in the air above the ocean. The extent to which microplastic ingestion affects the health of marine organisms is an active area of research with findings that are varied and sometimes contradictory. Narwhals, the so-called unicorns of the sea, possess one of the more extraordinary structures in the animal kingdom. The narwhal tusk is not a horn but a tooth, specifically the left upper canine, which in males grows forward through the upper lip and continues to elongate throughout life, sometimes reaching lengths of 2 to 3 meters. The tusk is spiraled, always in a left-hand spiral, and has a structure unlike any other mammalian tooth. The inner pulp cavity extends the full length of the tusk, and the outer surface is porous, connected to millions of fluid-filled tubules that open to the ocean water. Research published in 2017 found that narwhal tusks are highly sensitive. They can detect temperature, salinity, and pressure changes, and possibly electromagnetic fields, suggesting that the tusk functions partly as a sensory organ. The evolutionary significance of the tusk and the selection pressures that drove its extreme elongation remain subjects of ongoing research and debate. Jellyfish are among the oldest multicellular animals on Earth. The fossil record contains unambiguous jellyfish impressions dating to approximately 500 million years ago, and molecular clock estimates suggest the jellyfish lineage may be even older. They are also among the simplest. They have no brain, no heart, no blood, and no respiratory system. They are approximately 95% water by mass. Their nervous system is a simple nerve net, a diffuse network of neurons without a central ganglion. Yet this simple system is sufficient to coordinate swimming behavior, detect light, sense gravity, and respond to chemical stimuli. Some jellyfish species are capable of navigating effectively toward areas of higher food concentration. The lion's mane jellyfish, the largest known jellyfish species, can reach bell diameters of over 2 meters with tentacles extending up to 37 meters, making it one of the longest animals on Earth when measured from bell to tentacle tip. Turritopsis dohrnii, the so-called immortal jellyfish, is capable of a biological process unique among animals. When subjected to stress or aging, it can revert from its sexually mature adult form back to the sexually immature polyp stage, essentially resetting its developmental clock. This process, called transdifferentiation, involves the transformation of fully differentiated adult cells into cells of a different type, effectively reversing cellular aging. The jellyfish can repeat this cycle indefinitely, potentially making it biologically immortal in the sense that it does not die of old age. It can still die from disease, predation, or environmental damage. Its immortality is specific to the process of senescence. Scientists studying transdifferentiation in Turritopsis dohrnii hope to understand mechanisms that might eventually inform research on aging in other organisms. The ocean has a memory. The temperature of the ocean at any given location reflects not only current conditions, but the accumulated thermal history of the water, which may have been at the surface decades or centuries ago and has been slowly mixing through the deep ocean since. The oldest deep ocean water that has been circulating in the abyss since it last contacted the surface, is approximately 1,000 to 2,000 years old in the deepest parts of the Pacific. This means that deep ocean water currently registering measurable traces of carbon-14 from nuclear weapons tests in the 1950s and 1960s is only now arriving in some parts of the deep ocean. The ocean is, in this sense, a slow and capacious archive of atmospheric conditions from the historical past, one that oceanographers are learning to read. The acoustic properties of the ocean have been exploited for long-range communication since World War II, when the SOFAR channel, sound fixing and ranging, was discovered. The SOFAR channel is a layer of ocean water, typically at depths of 600 to 900 meters, where sound travels at its minimum speed due to the combined effects of temperature and pressure. Because of the physics of sound propagation, sound tends to be refracted back toward this minimum speed layer from both above and below, creating a waveguide that traps sound and allows it to travel enormous distances with relatively little attenuation. Military hydrophone arrays designed to listen for submarine movements in the SOFAR channel also detected unexpected biological sounds. The vocalizations of blue whales, fin whales, and other large cetaceans, and contributed to the discovery that whale calls are structured, complex, and in some cases may travel across entire ocean basins. The ocean is integral to the water cycle that maintains freshwater availability on land. Ocean evaporation, driven by solar energy absorbed at the ocean surface, generates the water vapor that forms clouds and ultimately falls as precipitation over land. The ocean evaporates approximately 434,000 cubic kilometers of water per year. Of this, about 390,000 cubic kilometers falls back into the ocean as precipitation, and the remainder, approximately 44,000 cubic kilometers per year, falls on land, replenishing rivers, lakes, groundwater aquifers, glaciers, and ice sheets. Without the ocean's enormous evaporative surface, the hydrological cycle would slow dramatically and the land surfaces of Earth would be far drier and far less hospitable to life. The ocean influences atmospheric chemistry in ways that extend well beyond carbon dioxide exchange. Phytoplankton produce a compound called dimethyl sulfide, or DMS, which is released into the atmosphere when phytoplankton die or are eaten. DMS oxidizes in the atmosphere to form sulfate aerosols that act as cloud condensation nuclei, tiny particles around which water vapor condenses to form cloud droplets. Increased phytoplankton productivity therefore leads to increased cloud formation over the ocean, which increases the reflection of sunlight back into space, potentially cooling the climate. This feedback loop, biological productivity influencing cloud formation influencing climate influencing biological productivity, is one of many complex feedbacks coupling the ocean biosphere to the climate system. The deep ocean sediment is a remarkable archive of Earth history. Sediments accumulate on the ocean floor at rates of roughly 1 to 10 centimeters per thousand years, building up layer by layer over millions of years. Drilling into these sediments and extracting cores has allowed paleoceanographers to reconstruct ocean temperatures, chemistry, circulation patterns, and biological productivity across tens of millions of years of Earth history. The fossil remains of tiny organisms, foraminifera, diatoms, coccolithophores, preserved in the sediments record the conditions under which they lived in extraordinary detail. Subtle variations in the isotopic composition of their calcium carbonate shells record past ocean temperatures and the volume of polar ice with precisions that can resolve changes on timescales of thousands of years. The deep ocean floor is, in this sense, the most complete continuous record of Earth's climate history available. The Southern Ocean, surrounding Antarctica, is the most important ocean for global climate regulation per unit of area. It is where deep, cold, dense water descends to the abyss and begins its journey through the global ocean conveyor, and it is one of the most important regions for the exchange of carbon dioxide between the ocean and atmosphere. The circumpolar Antarctic current, the Antarctic Circumpolar Current, is the largest and most powerful ocean current on Earth, transporting approximately 173 million cubic meters of water per second, roughly 5 times the transport of the Gulf Stream. The absence of any land barrier allows this current to circle the globe continuously, and its transport of cold, deep water connects all ocean basins, making the Southern Ocean a crucial node in the global circulation system. Seamounts, underwater mountains that rise from the ocean floor but do not reach the surface, number in the tens of thousands in the world's oceans, though the exact count depends on the minimum height used to define them. They act as obstacles to deep ocean currents, deflecting them upward in a process that brings nutrient-rich deep water toward the surface, creating highly productive habitats around their summits. Seamounts support dense communities of corals, sponges, and fish, and are important foraging areas for large pelagic predators including tuna, sharks, and marine mammals. Many seamounts harbor species found nowhere else on Earth, biological islands isolated by deep water that have accumulated unique communities over millions of years. The biology of seamounts remains poorly characterized. The logistics of working in deep water over underwater terrain are challenging, and the majority of seamounts have never been surveyed biologically. The ocean is the origin of life on Earth. The oldest microfossils yet found, dating to approximately 3.5 to 3.7 billion years ago, are marine organisms, primitive microbes that lived in shallow coastal waters or around hydrothermal vents. For the first 3 billion years of life's history on Earth, all life was marine. The colonization of land by plants occurred approximately 470 million years ago, and by animals approximately 380 million years ago. For most of life's history, the ocean was not merely the home of most life on Earth, but the home of all life on Earth. The biochemistry that underlies all living things, the genetic code, the basic metabolic pathways, the fundamental mechanisms of energy production and information transfer, was established in the ocean, and everything that has since evolved on land carries the deep heritage of those ancient marine origins. The ocean is still, in many fundamental ways, unknown. Even now, less than a third of the ocean floor has been mapped to modern standards, and scientists have directly sampled an even smaller fraction. The inventory of ocean species is far from complete. New species are described from museum collections, trawl samples, and direct observations every year, including species of fish, cephalopods, crustaceans, and invertebrates from every depth zone. The biological, chemical, and physical processes of the ocean, particularly in the mesopelagic zone, which is estimated to contain the largest biomass of fish on Earth, are understood only in outline. The deep ocean is the largest habitat on Earth, covers more of the planet's surface than any other ecosystem, and remains, in the most literal sense, largely unexplored. Kelp forests are among the most productive marine ecosystems on Earth, rivaling coral reefs in their biological complexity and richness. Giant kelp, Macrocystis pyrifera, grows faster than any other plant or alga on the planet. Under optimal conditions, it can grow up to 60 centimeters per day, reaching total lengths of 45 meters or more. Kelp forests provide food, shelter, and structural habitat for an extraordinary range of species: sea otters, harbor seals, Garibaldi fish, sheephead, rockfish, lingcod, various species of sharks, moray eels, octopus, abalone, sea urchins, nudibranch, sea stars, and hundreds of invertebrate species all depend on kelp forest ecosystems. The canopy of a mature kelp forest, viewed from below, creates an effect remarkably like looking up through a forest of tall trees. Light filtering through a dense layered canopy, creating alternating patches of brightness and shadow. The analogy to terrestrial forests is not merely visual. The structural complexity of kelp forests creates a diversity of microhabitats comparable to that created by forest structure on land. The ocean absorbs sound far better than air over very long distances, which is why submarines and underwater communication use sound rather than radio waves, which cannot penetrate seawater. The speed of sound in seawater is approximately 1,480 meters per second, about 4 times faster than in air, and varies with temperature, salinity, and pressure. This variation in sound speed with depth creates the refractive behavior that produces the SOFAR channel, but it also creates other acoustic phenomena. At shallower depths, sound reflects off the surface and bottom, creating complex interference patterns. The ocean is a three-dimensional acoustic environment in which sound can travel along curved paths, be concentrated or dispersed depending on the depth profile of temperature and salinity, and arrive at a listener from unexpected directions after bouncing off underwater ridges and continental shelves thousands of kilometers away. The Sargasso Sea, located in the North Atlantic and bounded by 4 ocean currents rather than by any coastline, is the only sea in the world defined entirely by ocean currents. It is characterized by exceptional clarity and low nutrient concentrations, among the lowest of any open ocean region, and its deep blue water has a transparency that allows sunlight to penetrate to depths of 60 meters or more. It is named for the sargassum seaweed that floats at its surface in enormous quantities, forming a complex, three-dimensional floating habitat that supports a community of animals, fish, crustaceans, worms, hydroids, bryozoans, and nudibranch, found nowhere else on Earth. Sargassum filefish, sargassum pipefish, and the sargassum frogfish are all camouflaged to be nearly indistinguishable from the floating weed. The Sargasso Sea is also the site of the spawning migration of both the American and European eels, which travel thousands of kilometers from their freshwater habitats in rivers and lakes to spawn in the Sargasso and then die. Their larvae drift back toward the continental coasts on ocean currents over a journey of 1 to 3 years. The European eel, Anguilla anguilla, has one of the most extraordinary and still poorly understood life cycles of any vertebrate. Adults spend most of their lives in freshwater rivers and lakes across Europe and North Africa, sometimes for 20 to 30 years. Then, triggered by cues that are not fully understood, they transform. Their eyes enlarge, their color changes from yellow-brown to silver, and their digestive systems shrink and become non-functional as their gonads develop. They then make a journey of approximately 6,000 kilometers to the Sargasso Sea to spawn and die, a journey that has never been directly observed or tracked in its entirety. Despite decades of research, nobody has ever caught a European eel actively spawning in the Sargasso. The juveniles, called leptocephali larvae, are transparent and leaf-shaped, bearing no obvious resemblance to an eel. They drift eastward on the Gulf Stream and North Atlantic Current for 1 to 3 years before metamorphosing into glass eels and entering rivers and estuaries. The European eel population has declined by more than 90% since the 1980s, and its life history remains incompletely characterized despite decades of intensive research. The mesopelagic zone, the twilight zone between 200 and 1,000 meters depth, is thought to contain the largest stock of fish biomass on Earth, yet it is among the least studied oceanic habitats. The fish of the mesopelagic, primarily small lanternfish, hatchetfish, and bristlemouth fish, are typically only a few centimeters long, but they occur in densities that produce what oceanographers call the deep scattering layer, a layer of biological material that appears on echo sounders as a false bottom and migrates upward at dusk and downward at dawn in the daily vertical migration. The total biomass of mesopelagic fish has been estimated by various methods to range from 1 to 10 billion tons, comparable to or exceeding the total current global fish catch. Understanding the ecology and carbon flux associated with mesopelagic fish is one of the priorities of current ocean science, because these fish play a critical role in the biological carbon pump, transporting surface carbon to depth in their bodies and through their respiratory products. Ocean trenches are not merely deep ravines in the seafloor. They are geologically active zones where oceanic crust is subducted beneath continental or oceanic plates, returning material from the seafloor to the mantle. The process is slow. Oceanic crust moves toward a subduction zone at roughly the same rate that fingernails grow. But over millions of years, it recycles an enormous volume of material. Subduction zones are associated with some of the most powerful earthquakes on Earth. The oceanic plate does not subduct smoothly but sticks to the overlying plate and then releases in sudden ruptures. The 2011 Tohoku earthquake, which generated the tsunami that caused the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear disaster, was a subduction zone earthquake that ruptured approximately 500 kilometers of fault and raised a section of seafloor by as much as 50 meters in places. The Pacific Ring of Fire, the chain of volcanoes and earthquake zones encircling the Pacific, is almost entirely defined by subduction zones. The biology of the polar oceans is governed by extreme seasonal light cycles, perpetual summer sunlight during the polar day and total darkness during the polar night. During the polar summer, the burst of sunlight triggers explosive phytoplankton growth in nutrient-rich polar waters, producing blooms that can cover thousands of square kilometers and form the base of food webs supporting krill, fish, seabirds, seals, and whales in extraordinary abundance. The Antarctic krill, Euphausia superba, is one of the most numerically abundant animals on Earth and one of the most important. It is the primary food source for baleen whales, crab-eater seals, Adelie penguins, and dozens of other species across the Southern Ocean. The total biomass of Antarctic krill has been estimated at approximately 500 million tons, likely the largest biomass of any single animal species on Earth. Submarine canyons are steep-walled valleys cut into continental shelves and slopes, often extending from river mouths or coastal indentations to the deep ocean floor. They are some of the most dynamic and biologically productive features of the deep ocean margins, channeling sediment, organic matter, and dense cold water from the continental shelf to the deep ocean. Some submarine canyons, including the Monterey Canyon off the coast of California, are larger than the Grand Canyon and support rich and well-studied biological communities. The walls and floors of submarine canyons are habitats for deep-water corals, slow-growing colonial organisms that can build reef structures at depths of 200 to 2,000 meters where light is insufficient for photosynthesis. Deep-water coral reefs are among the most biologically diverse deep-sea habitats, supporting hundreds of species of fish, crustaceans, echinoderms, and other invertebrates, but they are extremely fragile and very slow to recover from disturbance. The ocean floor near the poles contains deposits of methane hydrate, ice-like structures in which methane molecules are trapped within a lattice of water ice, stable under conditions of high pressure and low temperature. Methane hydrate deposits on the continental margins contain an enormous amount of carbon. Estimates suggest they contain more carbon than all other fossil fuel reserves combined. Under normal ocean floor conditions, methane hydrates are stable, but warming of bottom water temperatures could destabilize them, releasing methane, a potent greenhouse gas, into the water column and potentially the atmosphere. The potential for methane hydrate destabilization to produce a positive feedback amplifying climate warming is a genuine concern in Earth system science, though current evidence suggests the process would be slow on human timescales rather than catastrophic. The acoustic environment beneath the sea ice of the polar oceans is extraordinary. Sea ice is not rigid. It flexes, groans, cracks, and creaks as it moves, and the sounds it produces travel through the water beneath. Ice formation produces hissing and tinkling sounds from the crystallization process. Pressure ridges forming as ice flows collide produce deep groaning and booming sounds. Seals vocalize beneath the ice, producing haunting trills and warbles. Belugas, called sea canaries for the extraordinary range and variety of their vocalizations, produce clicks, whistles, squeals, and chirps beneath Arctic ice. Beneath Antarctic sea ice, the calls of Weddell seals, long, sweeping trills that sound simultaneously organic and electronic, travel for dozens of kilometers through the water, connecting individuals isolated by ice across large areas of the Southern Ocean. The open ocean, far from any coast, appears to most observers as featureless and empty. This is a perceptual illusion created by the scale of the environment. The open ocean is not featureless. It is structured by invisible boundaries of temperature, salinity, and chemistry that are as real as any physical structure, and that channel organisms and influence behavior as powerfully as mountains and rivers influence life on land. The boundaries between ocean water masses, thermal fronts, salinity gradients, concentrate plankton, and the organisms that feed on plankton, producing linear aggregations of productivity and biological activity in what appears to be open water. Seabirds detect these fronts and follow them, finding food at the convergences of water masses. Tuna, marlin, and other large pelagic fish aggregate along thermal fronts where prey is concentrated. The open ocean is not empty space. It is a three-dimensional landscape structured by invisible gradients. Bioluminescent displays in coastal waters sometimes achieve scales that are genuinely spectacular. Red tides, blooms of dinoflagellates dense enough to color the water red or brown during the day, produce brilliant blue bioluminescence at night when the water is disturbed. The wave crests glow as bioluminescent plankton are agitated. Boat wakes leave trails of cold blue light. Swimmers disturb glowing blue clouds that swirl around their bodies. These events are entirely biological, driven by the metabolic processes of single-celled organisms with no eyes, no nervous systems, and no awareness. The light they produce has been visible to ships at sea since ancient times and was described by ancient Greek sailors, by Charles Darwin during the voyage of the Beagle, and by sailors throughout history who had no way of knowing that what they were witnessing was the simultaneous bioluminescence of billions of individual plankton cells, each producing a flash of light when mechanically stimulated. The ocean has a profound influence on human biology and psychology that goes beyond the obvious role of seafood in diet. Research on attention restoration theory has found that natural environments, including coastal and marine environments, have restorative effects on mental fatigue. They require what Kaplan call soft fascination rather than directed attention, allowing cognitive resources to replenish. The sound of waves and the sight of water are among the most universally reported sources of psychological calm across cultures. Marine biologist Wallace J. Nichols' work on the psychological effects of water, what he calls blue mind, documents the consistent finding that proximity to water, particularly moving water, is associated with reduced stress hormones, reduced anxiety, improved mood, and enhanced creativity. Whether this reflects something innate in human psychology related to our deep evolutionary association with water-rich environments, or simply the absence of the stimuli associated with urban stress, remains an interesting open question. Deep-sea fish have developed a range of extraordinary strategies for feeding in an environment where food is scarce and encounters with prey are rare. The viper fish, with its enormous, fang-like teeth, which are too long to fit inside the fish's closed mouth, impales prey that it approaches while holding itself nearly still in the water. The barrel-eye fish has tubular eyes mounted on its head like periscopes, normally pointing upward to detect the silhouettes of prey or predators against the faint light from above, and capable of rotating forward to look directly ahead. The gulper eel has a hinged jaw that can open wide enough to swallow prey larger than itself, and a flexible body that can expand to accommodate the prey after it is swallowed. The dragonfish produces red bioluminescence, a wavelength of light invisible to most other deep-sea animals, which have no red-sensitive photoreceptors, but visible to the dragonfish itself. effectively hunting with a searchlight that is invisible to its prey. The ocean's chemical cycles are intimately linked to the evolution of atmospheric chemistry over geological time. The Great Oxidation Event, approximately 2.4 billion years ago, was caused by the evolution of cyanobacteria in the ocean, the first organisms capable of oxygenic photosynthesis, which produces oxygen as a byproduct. As these organisms proliferated in the ocean, they began releasing oxygen into the atmosphere in quantities that first reacted with and oxidized iron and other reduced compounds at the seafloor and in the water column, and eventually, over hundreds of millions of years, accumulated in the atmosphere to produce the oxygen-rich atmosphere that makes animal life possible. The oxygen we breathe, and have been breathing for hundreds of millions of years, is ultimately a product of the ocean's biological activity. The ocean made the atmosphere breathable. The diversity of life in the ocean is not simply large. It spans a wider range of biological form and evolutionary distance than all of terrestrial life. The animal kingdom includes approximately 35 recognized phyla, the highest level classification of animal body plans. Approximately 30 of these phyla are found in the ocean. Only one phylum, the Onychophora, the velvet worms, is entirely terrestrial. The ocean contains body plans and biochemical strategies that have no terrestrial equivalent. The radial symmetry of echinoderms, the jet propulsion of cephalopods, the internal hydraulic systems of sea urchins that power their tube feet, the chemosynthetic metabolism of vent bacteria. Terrestrial life, for all its variety, represents a subset of the biological experimentation that the ocean has been running for the past 3.7 billion years. Ocean noise pollution from shipping, sonar, and industrial activity has increased significantly over the past century and has measurable effects on marine life, particularly on animals that use sound for navigation, communication, and foraging. Low-frequency shipping noise has increased ambient ocean noise levels in the world's major shipping lanes by an estimated 10 to 100-fold over pre-industrial levels. This noise overlaps in frequency with the communication calls of several species of baleen whales, reducing the effective communication range between individuals. In areas of high shipping traffic, the communication range of blue whales, which rely on low-frequency calls to locate mates and maintain social contact across ocean basins, may have been reduced by 90% or more from pre-industrial levels. Military sonar exercises have been associated with mass strandings of beaked whales that appear to show physiological effects consistent with decompression sickness, suggesting that the animals alter their dive behavior in response to sonar in ways that produce nitrogen bubble formation in their tissues. The migrations of ocean animals are among the most extraordinary journeys on Earth. The leatherback sea turtle makes transoceanic migrations of up to 20,000 kilometers between its feeding grounds in the cold, productive waters off the coasts of North America and Europe and its nesting beaches in the tropics. The leatherback is the largest living reptile and the only sea turtle that can regulate its body temperature above the ambient water temperature, a form of thermoregulation that allows it to forage in cold waters inaccessible to other sea turtle species. Female leatherbacks return to nest on the same beach where they themselves hatched, navigating back to within meters of their birth site after journeys of thousands of kilometers through the open ocean, guided by the Earth's geomagnetic field. The humpback whale is one of the most widely studied and most culturally significant of the great whales. Its complex song, produced by males during the breeding season, is one of the most elaborate acoustic signals in the animal kingdom, lasting up to 20 minutes and repeated for hours without pause. Humpback songs are not fixed, but change continuously. New phrases and themes are introduced, spread through populations, and eventually replace earlier versions in a process of cultural evolution that has been tracked by researchers recording songs across ocean basins. A new phrase introduced in one population can spread to neighboring populations and eventually become the dominant song pattern across an entire ocean basin within a few years. The mechanism by which new song elements originate and spread through populations that are not in direct contact is not fully understood. The chemistry of the ocean at its boundaries, where freshwater rivers meet the salt ocean in estuaries and coastal zones, creates some of the most biologically productive and ecologically important habitats on Earth. In estuaries, the mixing of fresh and salt water creates salinity gradients that few organisms can tolerate across their full range, producing a natural zonation of communities. The high nutrient loads delivered by rivers, particularly nitrogen and phosphorus from agricultural runoff, fuel enormous productivity in coastal waters. Mangrove forests, salt marshes, and seagrass beds in coastal and estuarine zones provide nursery habitat for an extraordinary range of fish and invertebrate species, including many species that are economically important fishery targets as adults. The loss and degradation of coastal habitats through development, pollution, and sea level rise, therefore has consequences for fisheries productivity far offshore, through the loss of the nursery function that these coastal habitats provide. The deep ocean floor, away from hydrothermal vents and cold seeps, is one of the most food-limited environments on Earth. The primary source of nutrition for the deep ocean benthic community is marine snow, a continuous gentle rain of organic particles from the surface waters above, including dead plankton, fecal pellets, discarded mucus feeding webs, and organic aggregates. The concentration of marine snow decreases with depth as particles are decomposed by bacteria during their descent, and the energy available to the bottom community is a small fraction of the primary production at the surface. In the deepest ocean, communities are adapted to extremely low food availability. Many deep-sea organisms have very low metabolic rates, grow slowly, live for extremely long periods, and reproduce infrequently. Some deep-sea creatures may move remarkably little over the course of their lives, conserving energy in the sparse economy of the abyss. The ocean's influence on weather is not limited to long-term climate regulation. Short-term weather patterns, from the daily sea breeze that moderates coastal temperatures to the formation of tropical cyclones, are driven by the ocean-atmosphere interface. Tropical cyclones form over warm ocean water when sea surface temperatures exceed approximately 26 degrees Celsius, and they intensify as they draw energy from evaporation at the sea surface. The warm surface water provides the latent heat of vaporization that powers the convective engine of the storm. As a cyclone passes over cooler water or moves over land, it loses its energy source and weakens. The geography of tropical cyclone tracks, which basins they form in, which coasts they threaten, is determined largely by the distribution of warm ocean water, trade wind patterns, and the presence or absence of vertical wind shear in the atmosphere. The relationship between the ocean and human civilization has been profound from the earliest human migrations. Modern humans followed coastlines in their dispersal out of Africa, exploiting coastal resources including shellfish and marine mammals. The presence of shellfish middens, ancient refuse heaps of discarded shells, at archaeological sites around the world documents the importance of marine resources in the diet and economy of early human populations. Ocean-going technology, from outrigger canoes to sailing ships to modern container vessels, has enabled the dispersal of human populations, the exchange of goods and ideas across continents, and the development of global trade networks that underpin the modern world economy. Approximately 90% of global trade by volume is still carried by ocean shipping. The ocean is not merely a natural feature of the planet, but one of the fundamental physical frameworks of human civilization and global economy. The ocean plays a central role in the global phosphorus cycle, which is essential for all living things because phosphorus is a component of DNA, RNA, and the energy-carrying molecule ATP. Phosphorus enters the ocean from rivers carrying dissolved and particulate phosphorus from continental weathering and from atmospheric deposition of dust. In the ocean, phosphorus is incorporated into biological material by phytoplankton and subsequently moves through the food web. Much of the phosphorus incorporated into biological material sinks to the ocean floor as part of marine snow and is buried in sediments, effectively removing it from the biological cycle on geological timescales. The return of this buried phosphorus to the surface ocean requires either physical upwelling of deep water or geological processes, including weathering of phosphorus-bearing rock on land. The entire phosphorus cycle, from the weathering of rock to biological incorporation to burial in ocean sediments, operates on timescales of millions to hundreds of millions of years, making it one of the slowest of the major biogeochemical cycles. The acoustics of whale song have been studied since the 1960s, when Roger Payne and Scott McVeigh published the first analysis documenting that the sounds produced by humpback whales constituted a complex, structured song. Their work contributed to the Save the Whales campaign and shifted public perception of whales from commercially exploitable resources to cognitively sophisticated beings worthy of protection. What Payne and McVeigh documented was that the vocalizations of humpback whales in the North Atlantic were not random noise, but structured sequences of themes and phrases, organized hierarchically, with repetition and variation. The same male whales sang essentially the same song throughout a breeding season, but the song changed between seasons in a consistent direction, all males in a population singing the same current version of the song, all moving in the same direction of change. The social and cognitive mechanisms by which this culturally shared and collectively evolving signal is maintained are still being investigated. The dead zones of the ocean, hypoxic regions where dissolved oxygen concentrations are too low to support most marine life, have increased significantly in number and extent over the past half-century. They form primarily where agricultural runoff carries excess nitrogen and phosphorus into coastal waters, stimulating phytoplankton blooms whose decomposition by bacteria consumes the dissolved oxygen in the water. The Gulf of Mexico Dead Zone, which forms seasonally at the mouth of the Mississippi River, covers an area of up to 22,000 square kilometers during its peak development in summer. Within dead zones, fish and mobile invertebrates flee or die. Sessile organisms on the seafloor die in place. The sediments beneath dead zones become enriched with accumulated organic matter and are populated only by sulfur-reducing bacteria that produce hydrogen sulfide, creating an environment as biologically sterile as any on Earth outside the deep hydrothermal vent zones. The recovery of dead zones requires reductions in nutrient loading from land, a challenge closely tied to the practices of industrial agriculture. The ocean is the primary reservoir of iodine in the Earth system. Iodine in the ocean is converted by phytoplankton and kelp into volatile organic iodine compounds that enter the atmosphere, where they play a role in the chemistry of the marine boundary layer, participating in reactions that destroy ozone and form particles. Atmospheric iodine eventually deposits on land through rain and other processes, and its availability in soils and freshwater determines the iodine content of terrestrial food. In regions far from the ocean, dietary iodine deficiency was historically common and produced a spectrum of health problems, including goiter and cognitive impairments. The ocean's chemistry, mediated by biological activity, literally influences the nutrition and cognitive development of human populations on land. The Humboldt Current, flowing northward along the western coast of South America, is one of the most productive ocean regions on Earth. Cold water from the deep Southern Ocean is driven toward the surface by persistent southeast trade winds in a process called coastal upwelling, bringing nutrient-rich deep water into the sunlit surface layer where phytoplankton can exploit it. The resulting phytoplankton blooms support one of the most productive marine food webs on Earth. Anchoveta, sardines, and other small fish feed on the plankton in enormous abundance. These fish are prey for guano birds, cormorants, boobies, and pelicans, in colonies numbering in the millions, and the fish also support important commercial fisheries. The guano deposits produced by these seabird colonies on islands and headlands along the Peruvian coast were, until the development of synthetic fertilizers, one of the most valuable agricultural resources on Earth, and the guano trade was a significant factor in 19th century global economics. El Niño events that suppress the Humboldt Current's upwelling and warm the surface waters devastate the anchoveta and seabird populations with which this ecosystem is associated and can collapse the fisheries that depend on it within a single season. The ocean plays a crucial role in the global nitrogen cycle. Nitrogen gas makes up 78% of the atmosphere, but is chemically inert and cannot be used directly by most organisms. Making nitrogen biologically available, a process called nitrogen fixation, requires breaking the extremely strong triple bond between nitrogen atoms. In the ocean, nitrogen fixation is carried out primarily by cyanobacteria, particularly Trichodesmium, which forms large surface blooms in tropical and subtropical waters. Fixed nitrogen supports phytoplankton growth in nitrogen-limited ocean regions. Nitrogen is removed from the ocean through denitrification, a microbial process that converts fixed nitrogen back to nitrogen gas, occurring primarily in oxygen-depleted sediments and water columns. The balance between nitrogen fixation and denitrification determines the total availability of fixed nitrogen in the ocean and therefore regulates ocean productivity on geological timescales. This microbially driven nitrogen cycle is one of the less visible but more fundamental regulatory systems maintaining ocean biology. The abyssal plain, the broad, flat region of the ocean floor between the continental margins and the mid-ocean ridges, is the most extensive habitat on Earth, covering approximately 50% of the planet's surface. It is characterized by soft sediment accumulated over millions of years from marine snow and other sources, near freezing temperatures of about 2 to 4 degrees Celsius, total darkness, very high pressure, and extremely low food availability. Despite these challenging conditions, the abyssal plain is far from lifeless. Biodiversity surveys using box cores and remotely operated vehicles have found diverse communities of polychaete worms, holothurians, sea cucumbers, foraminifera, nematodes, and various other organisms. The dominant animals visible on the surface of abyssal sediment are often sea cucumbers, which move across the sediment surface in vast numbers in some regions, processing sediment for organic content and constituting the majority of the visible megafauna biomass. The deep-sea fish species characteristic of the abyss, including rattails, tripod fish, and deep-sea eels, are typically slow-moving, wide-ranging, and adapted to finding and exploiting food patches that are widely scattered in time and space. Polymetallic nodules are potato-shaped concretions of iron, manganese, nickel, copper, and cobalt that litter the surface of the abyssal plain in some regions, particularly the Clarion-Clipperton Zone in the eastern Pacific. They form extraordinarily slowly, accreting at rates of millimeters per million years around a nucleus, which may be a shark's tooth, a fragment of shell, or a volcanic rock. The nodule fields of the deep Pacific contain estimated reserves of manganese, cobalt, nickel, and copper vastly exceeding the total known land-based reserves of these metals, and interest in deep-sea mining has increased as the demand for metals used in electric vehicle batteries and other clean energy technologies has grown. The ecological consequences of mining nodule fields are potentially severe and long-lasting. Removing the nodules would destroy the biological communities living on and among them, and disturb the sediment in ways that could persist for centuries given the extremely slow sedimentation and biological recovery rates of the abyss. The biology of tidal zones is a study in adaptation to the most demanding of intertidal environments. Organisms that live in the intertidal zone must be capable of surviving both underwater and out of water, tolerating desiccation, extreme temperature fluctuations, and the mechanical force of wave action. Rocky intertidal zones are among the most thoroughly studied ecological communities, partly because they are accessible for observation and manipulation from land. They show a characteristic vertical zonation, different species occupying different horizontal bands of the rock, determined by their tolerance of aerial exposure and their competitive interactions with neighbors. Barnacles, limpets, mussels, sea stars, and anemones occupy their characteristic zones with extraordinary precision, and their distributions have been shown through careful experimental manipulation to reflect a balance between physiological tolerances and competitive and predatory interactions. The rocky intertidal is, in this respect, one of the most thoroughly experimentally analyzed ecological communities in biology. The ocean at night, seen from the deck of a ship far from land, is a different world from the daytime ocean. The stars reflect on undisturbed swells. The sound of the water against the hull changes as the wind drops at nightfall. In productive waters, the ocean surface may glow blue in the wake, bioluminescent plankton disturbed by the ship's passage. Flying fish, spooked by the bow wave, glide across the surface in the moonlight. Occasionally, cetaceans appear alongside, their blow visible as a white cloud against the dark sky. The deep ocean is not dark in the biological sense. It is lit by its own light, produced in quantities and complexities that no survey has fully characterized. The ocean at night, seen from the surface, is a reminder that what we see from above, the surface, the reflected light, the visible swells, is the merest skin of something that extends downward into darkness for kilometers, alive and active and indifferent to whether we are watching. The study of ancient ocean chemistry through the analysis of fossils preserved in marine sediments has revealed episodes in Earth's history when ocean chemistry was radically different from today. During ocean anoxic events, periods when the deep ocean became severely depleted in oxygen, the widespread deposition of organic-rich black shales records conditions of high productivity and very low oxygen availability. These events are associated with mass extinctions of marine life and with the deposition of source rocks for the petroleum reserves that modern civilization exploits. The chemistry of past oceans is readable in the isotopic ratios preserved in fossil shells, in the mineralogy of marine sediments, and in the molecular signatures of ancient biological activity. The ocean has changed profoundly over geological time. It has been warmer, colder, more acidic, more alkaline, more or less oxygenated. And the geological record of these changes is one of the primary tools through which scientists reconstruct the history of Earth's climate and biosphere. The largest single organisms on Earth may be marine. Although kelp forests are composed of multiple individual plants, some scientists argue that certain clonal marine organisms, including some sea grass meadows and some sponge colonies, may constitute single genetic individuals of extraordinary size. A meadow of the seagrass Posidonia oceanica in the Mediterranean has been estimated, based on genetic analysis, to represent a single clone that originated approximately 100,000 years ago and now covers approximately 15 square kilometers, making it one of the largest and potentially oldest living organisms on Earth. Individual sponges in some deep-sea and cold-water habitats can reach enormous sizes. Antarctic sponges have been recorded with masses exceeding a ton and ages estimated at over 1,000 years. The deep, cold, slow metabolism of these organisms and the stability of their environments allow them to accumulate size and age on timescales inaccessible to faster-living organisms. The ocean's surface is not flat even in the absence of waves. The geoid, the theoretical surface of equal gravitational potential that approximates mean sea level, is not a perfect sphere. It varies by as much as 100 meters between different parts of the world ocean. Because variations in the density of the Earth's interior create local variations in the strength of gravity, and ocean water redistributes itself until the gravitational potential is equalized. Satellite altimetry has mapped the geoid with extraordinary precision, revealing that the ocean's surface dips over cold, dense downwelling regions and rises over warm, expansive regions. These satellite measurements have provided information not only about ocean circulation, but about the structure of the Earth's interior, since the density variations driving the geoid anomalies reflect the distribution of mass deep in the mantle. The migratory behavior of ocean animals is guided by a variety of navigational systems, some of which remain incompletely understood. Sea turtles use the Earth's magnetic field as a navigational reference, sensing both the intensity and the inclination angle of the field to determine their position on the globe, effectively reading a magnetic map. Salmon imprint on the specific chemical signature of their natal river as juveniles and use this olfactory memory to navigate back to the river when they return to spawn years later, tracking the scent gradient through dozens of kilometers of river system to locate the precise stretch where they were born. Albatrosses use a combination of magnetic sensing, star navigation, and learn knowledge of wind patterns to navigate across the South Pacific with extraordinary precision. Each of these navigational systems evolved independently, reflects different sensory modalities, and operates on different spatial and temporal scales. Yet each allows animals to make journeys of thousands of kilometers with remarkable fidelity. The deep-sea octopus Granulidon boreopacifica was observed brooding a single clutch of eggs for 4.5 years in the Monterey Canyon, the longest known brooding period of any animal. Throughout this entire period, the female was observed to tend her eggs, cleaning them with her suckers and directing water over them with her arms. She did not eat during this time, and by the end of the brooding period, she had visibly aged, with damaged skin and reduced activity. When her eggs finally hatched, she disappeared, assumed to have died shortly after her eggs hatched, having devoted her final years entirely to the success of her offspring. This extraordinary maternal investment in a relatively cold, food-poor deep-sea environment represents an extreme example of the trade-off between offspring number and offspring quality, a fundamental axis of life history variation. Halibut are among the stranger vertebrates from a morphological perspective. They begin life as larvae with eyes on both sides of their head, like most fish. As they mature and adopt a bottom-dwelling lifestyle, lying flat on the seafloor, one eye migrates to the other side of the head so that both eyes end up on the same side, the side that will face upward. In some halibut species, both eyes end up on the right side. In others, both end up on the left. The migration of the eye takes place over a period of days as the juvenile fish settles to the bottom, and involves not just the movement of the eye, but substantial remodeling of the skull. The flat-bodied, two-eyed topside that results is an extraordinarily successful design for an ambush predator that lies camouflaged on the seafloor watching for prey from above. The sounds of the seafloor in seismically active regions tell the story of the dynamic geological environment beneath the ocean. Hydrophone arrays deployed near mid-ocean ridges have recorded what oceanographers call T-waves. earthquake signals that convert from seismic waves to acoustic waves as they enter the ocean, allowing the detection and location of submarine earthquakes that are too small to register on land-based seismographs. These recordings have revealed that mid-ocean ridges are not continuously active but experience episodic pulses of activity, swarms of small earthquakes associated with the intrusion of magma that can last for weeks and then fall quiet for months or years. The crackling and rumbling of the mid-ocean ridge system, heard through underwater microphones, is the sound of the ocean floor being continuously created at the rate of a few centimeters per year. The ocean's colors are not fixed. The deep blue of the open ocean reflects the optical properties of pure seawater, which absorbs red wavelengths and scatters blue. Coastal and productive ocean waters appear green because of the presence of phytoplankton, whose chlorophyll absorbs red and blue light and reflects green. In some shallow tropical seas, the brilliant turquoise color comes from the reflection of light off-white sand or limestone seafloor in shallow, clear water. In polar seas, the meltwater from sea ice creates a fresh, cold surface layer that can appear almost black against a steel-gray sky. And in regions of high phytoplankton productivity, the water can turn shades of yellow, brown, or even red during dense algal blooms. Satellite ocean color sensors measure the chlorophyll content of the upper ocean across the entire global ocean, allowing the tracking of phytoplankton blooms and productivity patterns from space. The Challenger expedition of 1872 to 1876, conducted aboard the British research vessel HMS Challenger, is generally considered the founding expedition of modern oceanography. Over almost 4 years, the Challenger circumnavigated the globe, making systematic measurements of ocean depth, temperature, chemistry, and biology at hundreds of stations. The expedition discovered hundreds of new species, measured the depth of the Mariana Trench for the first time, documented the mid-ocean ridge system, and demonstrated that the deep ocean was not, as many had believed, a lifeless abyss, but a biologically rich environment. The 50-volume report produced from the expedition's data, published over 2 decades, established the basic framework of physical and biological oceanography that subsequent research has built upon for a century and a half. The Challenger's work transformed the ocean from a featureless void on scientific maps into a dimensioned, mapped, and partially characterized domain. The rhythm of the ocean, the regularity of tides, the seasonality of currents and productivity, the predictable return of warm and cold water masses, has structured the lives of coastal human populations throughout history. Fishing calendars, planting calendars, migration patterns, and trade routes have all been calibrated to the ocean's rhythms, read through generations of accumulated observation and encoded in the knowledge systems of maritime cultures around the world. Pacific Islander navigation, the ability to navigate across thousands of kilometers of open ocean using stars, wave patterns, the behavior of birds, and the feel of ocean swells, represents one of the most sophisticated systems of practical oceanography ever developed, independent of any written tradition. Polynesian voyagers had settled the Pacific from New Zealand to Hawaii to Easter Island centuries before European explorers had developed the instruments to navigate across the Atlantic with confidence. The ocean was not a barrier to these cultures. It was their highway. The biology of the open ocean surface, the Neuston, is its own specialized world. The water surface itself is a habitat colonized by organisms that live at the air-water interface. The Portuguese man-of-war is not a jellyfish, but a siphonophore, a colonial organism composed of individual zooids, each specialized for a different function, collectively forming what appears to be a single animal. Its gas-filled float rides at the surface, keeping it at the air-water interface, while its tentacles hang below, sometimes extending 30 to 50 meters into the water. The tentacles deliver a powerful sting, used to paralyze fish and other prey. Despite the severity of its sting, the man-of-war is prey for several specialized predators, including the loggerhead sea turtle and the violet sea snail, Janthena, which itself lives at the ocean surface, floating on a raft of bubbles it secretes, and feeds on the man-of-war by eating from below. The predator-prey relationship between two animals that both live at the air-sea interface, each sustained by its ability to stay at the surface in the open ocean, is a small illustration of the specificity and intricacy of ecological relationships throughout the ocean. The deep-sea vent communities discovered in 1977 have fundamentally changed thinking about the origin of life. Before hydrothermal vents were discovered, the prevailing assumption was that life required sunlight, either directly or as the original energy source for the food webs that support it. Vent communities demonstrated that life could be entirely supported by chemical energy, specifically by the oxidation of hydrogen sulfide and methane, with no connection to solar energy at all. This raised the possibility that life could have originated at deep-sea hydrothermal vents in the early Earth's ocean, powered by geochemical energy before the evolution of photosynthesis. It also raised the possibility that life might exist in the subsurface oceans of other solar system bodies. Europa's ocean beneath its ice crust, Enceladus's ocean detected through the water vapor plumes erupting from its south pole, the possible subsurface oceans of other outer solar system moons. The discovery of chemosynthetic life at ocean vents expanded the range of environments in which life was considered possible, and by extension expanded the search space for life elsewhere in the universe. Whale falls, the bodies of dead whales that sink to the deep ocean floor, are important ecological events that provide enormous but temporary food bonanzas in the food-limited deep ocean. A single large whale carcass can provide as much organic carbon to the deep sea floor as would normally fall as marine snow over decades. The colonization of a whale fall proceeds through a series of successional stages. In the first stage, lasting months to years, mobile scavengers, deep-sea sharks, hagfish, sleeper sharks, and a variety of invertebrates consume the soft tissue. In the second stage, enrichment opportunist species colonize the exposed bones and surrounding sediment. In the third stage, specialized sulfophilic bacteria colonize the lipid-rich bones, producing hydrogen sulfide through sulfate reduction, which then supports a community of chemosynthetic organisms similar in character to hydrothermal vent communities. A large whale fall can sustain the sulfophilic community stage for decades. Some species found at whale falls were subsequently also found at hydrothermal vents and cold seeps, suggesting that whale falls may serve as stepping stones, islands of chemosynthetic habitat, allowing vent and seep specialists to disperse across the deep ocean floor. The continental shelves, the shallow, relatively flat regions of ocean floor extending from the coastline to the continental slope, represent less than 10% of the total ocean area, but account for approximately 90% of the total commercial fish catch and a disproportionate share of marine biodiversity. Continental shelves receive nutrients from rivers, from upwelling along their edges, and from the seasonal mixing of shallow water columns by storms and tidal forcing. They are where the sunlit water column extends all the way to the sediment surface, allowing benthic algae and seagrasses to grow, which provides structural habitat and additional primary production beyond that of the phytoplankton alone. The combination of shallow depth, high nutrient availability, and structural complexity of the seafloor makes continental shelves the most productive marine habitat type on Earth and the most intensively exploited. The history of commercial whaling illustrates, in stark terms, the capacity of industrial exploitation to deplete even the largest ocean animal populations in a brief period relative to the timescales on which those populations evolved. Before commercial whaling began, the global population of blue whales has been estimated at approximately 350,000 individuals. By the mid-20th century, after a century of industrialized whaling, the global population had been reduced to an estimated 400 to 1,400 individuals, a reduction of more than 99%. The population has recovered somewhat since the 1986 International Whaling Commission moratorium on commercial whaling, and current estimates place the global population at approximately 10,000 to 25,000 individuals. Full recovery to pre-whaling population sizes is uncertain. Blue whales reproduce slowly, and the krill populations on which they depend have themselves been affected by climate change and other human impacts. The case of the blue whale is one of the most dramatic examples of human-caused wildlife population collapse, and also of the slow, fragile possibility of biological recovery when exploitation is sufficiently reduced. The ocean is currently changing in ways that have no precedent in the geological record at this rate of change. Sea surface temperatures are rising. Ocean heat content is increasing across all depths. Sea level is rising through a combination of thermal expansion and the melting of land-based ice. Ocean pH is declining as additional CO2 dissolves in the water. Arctic sea ice is declining in area and thickness. Ocean circulation is changing. The timing of seasonal phytoplankton blooms is shifting. The distributions of fish, marine mammals, and seabirds are moving poleward as their preferred temperature ranges shift. Coral bleaching events are occurring more frequently, with less recovery time between events. Oxygen minimum zones are expanding. These changes are occurring simultaneously, and their interactions are not fully understood. The ocean that exists today is measurably different from the ocean of 1900, and the changes are accelerating. And yet the ocean persists. It has persisted through 5 mass extinction events, through repeated episodes of ocean acidification and anoxia, through the snowball Earth glaciations that extended sea ice to the equator, through the Permian-Triassic extinction that eliminated perhaps 96% of all marine species. Each time, the ocean has been repopulated, reorganized, and has continued its role as the foundation of Earth's biology and the regulator of its chemistry and climate. The ocean is not fragile in the geological sense. It is ancient, capacious, and highly resilient over the timescales of millions of years. What is at stake in the current moment is not the ocean itself, but the particular configuration of biology and chemistry that makes it hospitable to the life forms that exist today, including the coral reefs and the fisheries and the marine mammals that share this brief moment in geological time with us. Sea stars, formerly called asteroids, are among the more ecologically influential invertebrates of intertidal and subtidal marine ecosystems. The role of the ochre sea star Pisaster ocraceus as a keystone predator in rocky intertidal communities was demonstrated in a classic experiment by the ecologist Robert Payne in the 1960s. When Payne removed all Pisaster from a section of rocky intertidal coast and excluded them from returning, the community was rapidly dominated by mussels, which outcompete most other species and reduced biodiversity dramatically. The sea star, by consuming mussels and preventing any single species from monopolizing the habitat, maintained the diversity of the community. Payne coined the term keystone species to describe organisms like Pisaster, whose disproportionate ecological influence relative to their abundance maintains community structure. In 2013, a sea star wasting disease began spreading along the Pacific coast of North America, killing Pisaster and dozens of other sea star species in catastrophic numbers. The ecological consequences, surges in mussel abundance, declines in species diversity in affected communities, were consistent with the keystone predator hypothesis at an oceanic scale. The relationship between the ocean and clouds is more intimate than is generally appreciated. Dimethyl sulfide produced by phytoplankton enters the atmosphere and contributes to the formation of cloud condensation nuclei over the ocean, and these clouds in turn influence how much sunlight reaches the ocean's surface and therefore how warm the surface water is and how productive the phytoplankton are. This feedback, sometimes called the CLAW hypothesis after its four original proposers, represents a potential self-regulatory mechanism in the Earth system, in which biological productivity in the ocean could modulate its own climate conditions. The magnitude and direction of this feedback under current and future climate conditions is not settled, but it illustrates how deeply the biology of the ocean is embedded in the physical and chemical systems of the planet. The behavior of individual water molecules in the ocean gives rise, through the properties of water itself, to many of the ocean's most important characteristics. Water has an unusually high specific heat capacity. It takes more energy to raise the temperature of water by 1 degree than for almost any other common substance. This gives the ocean an enormous capacity to store and release heat, moderating the temperatures of coastal regions and slowing the rate at which the global climate responds to changes in the energy balance. Water also has an unusually high latent heat of evaporation. A large amount of energy is required to convert liquid water to vapor, which means that ocean evaporation is an efficient cooling mechanism for the surface and a major carrier of energy from the tropics to the poles through the atmosphere. These properties of water, determined by its molecular structure and the hydrogen bonds between water molecules, are fundamental to why the ocean functions as a climate regulator. The polar oceans support some of the most extreme of all marine biological adaptations. Antarctic ice fish of the family Channicthidae are the only known vertebrates that lack hemoglobin, the oxygen-carrying protein that gives blood its red color. Their blood is nearly colorless, and they rely on dissolved oxygen carried directly in the plasma rather than on hemoglobin to supply their tissues. They can do this because the cold Antarctic waters are oxygen-rich and because their metabolic rates are extremely low. They compensate for the lower oxygen-carrying capacity of their hemoglobin-free blood with unusually large hearts, large gill surface areas, and high blood volume. They are, in a sense, evolutionary experiments in the limits of vertebrate physiology, living demonstrations of what is possible when the usual constraints are relaxed by a sufficiently stable and oxygen-rich environment. Bioluminescence in the ocean is not merely light for its own sake. It serves highly specific biological functions that differ between species and contexts. Counterillumination is a camouflage strategy used by many mesopelagic fish and invertebrates. They produce bioluminescence on their undersides that matches the intensity and spectrum of the dim light filtering down from the surface, making them invisible to predators looking upward from below. A lanternfish seen from below would disappear against the background light. Seen from above, it is dark against the dark. The burglar alarm response is a defensive strategy in which a threatened organism produces a flash of bioluminescence when attacked, illuminating its predator and making the predator visible to its own predators, an extremely effective secondary defense for small, transparent gelatinous organisms. Some deep-sea organisms produce bioluminescence that mimics the appearance of a bioluminescent lure or the body of another species, attracting prey that are themselves looking for something. Bioluminescence in the ocean is a communication system, a camouflage system, a predator-prey interaction system, and an ecological language written in light. The iron cycle in the ocean is one of the most important and most finely balanced of all the ocean's biogeochemical processes. Iron is an essential nutrient for phytoplankton, required for the enzymes that carry out photosynthesis and nitrogen fixation. but it is present in seawater at extraordinarily low concentrations, typically only a few nanomoles per liter in the open ocean. In large regions of the ocean, including the Southern Ocean, the subarctic Pacific, and the equatorial Pacific, iron limitation prevents phytoplankton from fully utilizing the available nutrients. These are called high-nutrient, low-chlorophyll regions, characterized by unused nitrogen and phosphorus, but insufficient iron to support growth. The primary sources of iron to the open ocean are atmospheric dust deposited from the continents, and iron released from deep-sea sediments by the reduction of iron-bearing minerals. The availability of iron, therefore, depends on the geography of dust transport, which is sensitive to climate, and on the intensity of deep-water upwelling. During glacial periods, when dust transport was more intense, ocean iron availability was higher, phytoplankton productivity was greater, and more carbon was sequestered from the atmosphere, a feedback that may have contributed to the lower atmospheric CO2 levels characteristic of ice ages. The ocean off the coast of Peru and northern Chile has, in some years, supported the largest single-species fishery in the world, the Peruvian anchoveta fishery. At its peak in the late 1960s and early 1970s, the anchoveta catch reached over 12 million tons per year, more than any other fishery in history. The fish were used primarily to make fish meal for poultry and pig feed. In 1972 and 1973, the combination of El Niño-driven collapse of the Humboldt upwelling and prior overfishing caused the anchoveta stock to crash dramatically. The fishery has partially recovered since, but the combination of environmental variability and intense fishing pressure continues to make it one of the most volatile fisheries in the world. The story of the Peruvian anchoveta is one of the clearest examples of the vulnerability of ocean fisheries that depend on a single, environmentally sensitive species, and of the consequences of managing fisheries without adequately accounting for that environmental variability. The floor of the Arctic Ocean is one of the least explored regions on Earth. Access is limited by sea ice for most of the year, and the extreme darkness of polar winter makes operations difficult. What surveys have been conducted reveal a geologically complex environment. The Arctic Ocean is partly underlain by continental crust. The Lomonosov Ridge, which bisects the ocean from Greenland to Russia, is a fragment of continental crust that separated from the Eurasian shelf approximately 56 million years ago. The biological communities of the Arctic seafloor include cold water corals, sponge gardens, dense populations of sea cucumbers, and specialized communities on the underside of sea ice, a unique habitat colonized by ice algae and the specialized organisms that feed on them. The dramatic reduction of Arctic sea ice in recent decades has opened new areas of the Arctic Ocean to research and commercial interest, and the scientific understanding of this region is expanding rapidly, even as the sea ice that made it inaccessible disappears. Submarine volcanoes outnumber their terrestrial counterparts enormously. Approximately 80% of all volcanic activity on Earth occurs on the ocean floor, primarily along the mid-ocean ridges where tectonic plates are separating and magma is continuously welling up to create new oceanic crust. The scale of this activity is immense, but largely invisible. The eruptions typically occur at depths where the overlying water pressure suppresses explosive behavior, producing pillow lavas, distinctive rounded lobes of basalt formed when lava flows into cold seawater and solidifies rapidly on the outside while still flowing within. The mid-ocean ridge system is a planet-encircling chain of active volcanoes, continuously building new ocean floor, and the total volume of magma erupted along the ridges each year exceeds the total volcanic output of all terrestrial volcanoes combined. The chemistry of the deep ocean changes on timescales of centuries to millennia as water masses form at the poles, sink, and circulate through the deep basins. The oldest water in the deep North Pacific is estimated to be approximately 1,500 years old. It was last at the surface when the Tang dynasty was declining in China and Viking ships were exploring the North Atlantic. During its time at depth, this water has accumulated dissolved carbon dioxide from the respiration of organisms that sank and decomposed above it, making deep Pacific water particularly carbon-rich and corrosive to calcium carbonate. This corrosivity has a depth threshold, the carbonate compensation depth, below which calcium carbonate dissolves faster than it accumulates. Calcareous organisms falling from the surface are preserved in sediments above this depth and dissolve below it, producing a characteristic change in sediment composition at the carbonate compensation depth that is visible in sediment cores and used to track changes in ocean chemistry over time. The relationship between the ocean and the atmosphere is maintained through an enormous number of simultaneous exchange processes: gas exchange, heat exchange, momentum exchange, and the exchange of particles and aerosols, occurring at the air-sea interface across the entire ocean surface, every moment of every day. The exchange of oxygen between ocean and atmosphere maintains the oxygen content of both. The exchange of water vapor drives the global water cycle. The exchange of carbon dioxide is what makes the ocean a significant carbon sink. The exchange of heat redistributes solar energy from the tropics to the poles. The exchange of sea salt aerosols, tiny particles of dried seawater ejected into the atmosphere by breaking waves, affects the chemistry of marine air, the formation of sea fog, and the nucleation of clouds. The ocean surface is not a boundary between two separate systems. It is a zone of continuous and mutual exchange that makes the ocean and atmosphere function as a single coupled system. The ocean genome, the total collection of genetic information present in all marine organisms, is vast and largely uncharacterized. Metagenomic studies, which sequence the DNA present in seawater samples rather than attempting to culture individual organisms, have revealed that a liter of surface ocean water contains tens of thousands of distinct microbial genomes and many millions of distinct gene sequences. Many of these genomes belong to organisms that have never been cultured, observed, or characterized in any way except through the sequences of their genes. The catalog of ocean microbial diversity has expanded enormously since metagenomics became practical in the early 2000s, and new surveys continue to reveal microbial lineages with no known cultivated relatives, metabolisms unlike anything previously characterized, and ecological roles that are only beginning to be inferred from their gene content. The microbiological ocean is, in many respects, the least explored of all the ocean's dimensions. The global ocean has a measurable effect on the rotation rate of the Earth. As ocean currents accelerate and decelerate, they exchange angular momentum with the solid Earth, causing tiny fluctuations in the length of the day, fluctuations measurable only with extremely precise atomic clocks. Seasonal changes in ocean current speed, driven by the annual cycle of winds and temperature, produce corresponding seasonal variations in the length of the day of a few milliseconds. The longer-term slowing of Earth's rotation by tidal friction, currently adding approximately 1.4 milliseconds per century to the length of the day, is also an ocean effect, driven by the tidal interaction between the moon and the ocean water on the rotating Earth. The ocean's motion is literally changing how fast the Earth turns. The ocean at its deepest is more alien than most environments imagined in science fiction. At the Challenger Deep, pressure is enough to reduce the volume of a sample of seawater by about 5% compared to surface conditions. The water is near freezing. It is completely dark. The rate of sedimentation is so slow that a single centimeter of sediment at the bottom represents thousands of years of accumulation. Microbial life in the sediment is active but extraordinarily slow, with generation times estimated in thousands of years for some species. And yet the chemistry of life, the same nucleic acids, the same amino acids, the same enzymatic machinery that drives life at the surface, operates there, in that extreme darkness, under that crushing weight, doing what life does. The deep ocean is the most extensive biome on Earth, the least explored, and in many respects the most profoundly strange. And it is entirely continuous with the water you see when you walk to the edge of any sea. The abyssal plains of the Pacific hold sediments containing microfossils of organisms that lived during the Cretaceous period, the age of the dinosaurs, preserved in layers of clay and carbonate ooze laid down over tens of millions of years. In those sediments, the transitions between biological eras are recorded. The thin layer of iridium-enriched clay that marks the impact of the asteroid 66 million years ago, the sudden disappearance of certain foraminiferal species above it, and the slow recovery and reorganization of plankton communities in the millions of years afterward. The ocean preserved this record through all the upheavals of the intervening time. It held the evidence for the mass extinction, undisturbed in the dark, until human beings learned to drill into sediment cores and read what was written there. The sea mounts of the Pacific and Atlantic that were once oceanic islands, now submerged by a combination of tectonic subsidence and sea level change, form flat-topped underwater mountains called geos. Their flat tops were created by wave erosion when they were at or near sea level, and they now sit hundreds or thousands of meters below the surface, populated by communities of cold water corals and sponges that have colonized their hard substrates. Some geos retain fossils of the shallow water organisms that lived on them when they were above water. Ancient reefs and island communities preserved in rock, now in total darkness at depth, recording the biography of a piece of ocean floor from its volcanic birth through its island life to its slow subsidence into the abyss. The water you drink today has almost certainly spent time in the ocean. The hydrological cycle moves water continuously through evaporation, atmospheric transport, precipitation, groundwater flow, and river runoff, and every water molecule completes this cycle on timescales ranging from days to hundreds of thousands of years. Water that falls as rain in a mountain catchment and flows down a river to the sea rejoins the ocean, evaporates again, and may fall again as rain on a continent thousands of kilometers away. The water in your body was in the ocean, perhaps multiple times, over the billions of years of Earth's history. The ocean is not distant from you. It is part of a cycle that has moved through every living thing, including you. There is something fitting about ending here, at the edge of the known ocean, looking out into the uncharted dark. The same ocean was making waves before there were eyes to watch it, before there were ears to hear it, before there was anything on land at all. It is the ocean that held the first living systems on Earth, the ocean that shaped the atmosphere, the ocean that still moves heat, carbon, nutrients, sound, and life around the planet. Still circulating, still changing, still full of light in its shallow waters and full of creatures in its deepest cold. Unhurried, immense, older than the mountains, more patient than any human lifetime. It will still be moving tomorrow. Sleep well. Good night.